But obviously you've been travelling the country over the last few days, I imagine taking the pulse of the country, but also making some perceptions on the way the media have been reporting this story. And I wanted to start by asking you for your perception media are at in their reporting of the Clean Energy Future package that you announced on Sunday, but also where you think the public are at on the journey to understand the details of what is a complex but important policy.
Well, thank you for that question. I had the opportunity, as people might have seen, in Brisbane last night to attend a community forum, and my sense from that is people are very engaged. They are still anxious. They've heard a lot of very scary things about what pricing carbon might mean for them and their families and their jobs. And so they are anxious, but they're trying to get to grips with the detail. People had obviously taken some time to get on the website. Some of them had studied the information that was put out last Sunday. So that's reinforced in me that there's still a lot to do to get the basics of the package out to people, and a lot to do to help them understand the way in which pricing carbon will actually drive the kind of clean energy future we want. So to explain the price signals in the system and the change that that drives. And people do want to understand what it's going to mean for their pay packet and their family payments and members of their family who are on the pension, and so we'll have to keep talking to people about all of that too. I did today at the National Press Club talk to some of the journalists there about making sure.
How were they?
Well, I think they're fine, and I think
very cordial of you.
I think they're fine. I was reinforcing a point about making sure we get the right information to people. There's been a lot of fear generated. Now the facts are on the table. We've got a responsibility to get people the facts.
So I want to move to one of the questions that has been submitted. This young person is in the audience. She's a high school student, Mary Lou. Are you around, Mary Lou? There we are.
I'm not a student. I'm a mature teacher.
I think they're okay. Well, I knew I shouldn't have tried that on the fly. I probably should have warned someone that I was going to do that. This may or may not be you, Mary Lou. When school resumes in 10 days' time, that is you?
Yes,
excellent. The first lesson for her Year 11 economics class, which she is of course the teacher of and not the student of, is on the carbon tax. And so perhaps you might help her students with a bit of pre-homework. They are wondering, could you tell us why Australia should be sold on your plan over Tony Abbott's? Because of course there are now two on the table.
Sure. Well, I'll try and help the students with their homework, though really they should be wrestling with it themselves, shouldn't they? But I'll give a few hints. Our plan is to tackle climate change and to reduce carbon pollution, but to do that at the least possible cost to the Australian economy. And if you're going to do something at the least possible cost, then it makes sense to harness the power of the market to get that done. So we are sending a price signal that something that used to be able to be done for absolutely nothing, putting carbon pollution in our atmosphere, will now cost. And that will change behaviour in ways that we can't foresee all of the details of now. Business people will innovate, they'll look to new technologies to reduce the amount of carbon pollution they put in our atmosphere. And so it's that creative power of the market and creative power of our industries that will drive change. And yes, there will be some flow-through price impacts, and that will send some signals to consumers as well, who will get household assistance, and they can continue to buy what they used to or make some cleaner choices and buy things that are comparatively cheaper because they've got comparatively less carbon pollution associated with them, rather than things that are comparatively more expensive. So it's an efficient mechanism. It'll be an internationally linked scheme when we move to the emissions trading scheme, which means that the price will be the price that around the world other nations are paying to take a tonne of carbon pollution out of the atmosphere. The problem with the scheme that Mr Abbott has put forward, well, doesn't make any sense. You know, there's no explanation as to how it would possibly work. And it isn't going to have carbon pollution reduced at the least possible cost. So because he's denying the power of the market, he's either left in an endless world of picking winners, where Canberra bureaucrats pick which polluters to subsidise, even as polluters next door open up, So you know, work with one business, give them some money, they reduce their pollution, but there's no economy-wide cap. A business next door can just open up the next day with more pollution. So pick winners, perhaps rely on a lot of regulation that brings additional costs. And so when you model all of that through, we believe the costs will be $720 per year per family, which is a far greater cost for our economy than anything we are asking people to do for reducing carbon under our scheme. So I'm sure that in that economics class you talk about the invisible hand, and I'm sure you talk about the market, and you talk about demand and supply, and you talk about the efficiency of markets. We are bringing all of those skills and tools to bear in the design of our carbon pollution scheme as it was announced last Sunday.
So one of the most common questions that we got asked, one of the most common comments we've seen online over the last few days relates to the Clean Energy Fund. And perhaps one of the most exciting pieces of this package is that new $10 billion. And we understand, again, that from economics, that this will unlock a range of private sector investments in clean energy as well. But the result of this, the modelling seems to suggest that this will get us to about 40% renewable energy powered by the middle of this century. And of course, many in the community are hoping to see that figure at 100%. And so you can imagine that many in the community are hoping that in the future there may be more we can do to try and drive down the marginal abatement cost, another term for the economics students, of clean energy. And so one of the specific questions that we've got here, people are wondering, as the buffer payments to polluters reduce over time, and this of course in this plan, the minimum period for ETs, those emissions intensive trade exposed, seems to be about 5 years as opposed to 10 as it was in the CPRS. As those payments to the biggest polluters reduce over time, do you see scope to invest even more in clean energy? And are you open to some of the other policy ideas that people have been putting on the table, like increasing the renewable energy target or perhaps some type of commercial feed-in tariff over time?
The nature of change in our economy and the way we do things is once you get started, it tends to be like a snowball running downhill. Change happens at a faster and faster rate. You know, I was talking about this at the press club today, and I talked about it at the Brisbane community meeting last night. When I look at the speed of change in information technology in my lifetime, it's just remarkable. From the very first days of mobile phones, the very first days of the internet, of email, I've seen all of that introduced, and now of course we're never separated from our Blackberries, and there's more computing power in that Blackberry than NASA used when it was engaged in the moonshot. So, you know, these things, once you start on innovation, the pace of it can just, you know, blow your mind. And I think that will happen with clean energy as well. I think as we attract more businesses into financing ventures, so taking those smart ideas that are available already today and the ones that will become available in the future, and putting real dollars behind them so that they grow into being major projects. I think once we start doing that, then it will become self-sustaining and the pace of change will quicken. And one of the great privileges about this job is you get to go around and see some of these things, and they're truly remarkable. I talked, you know, today about being in Brunswick, in Melbourne, geothermal, powering heating. You know, people would think hot rocks, they're somewhere in, you know, the desert, in the outback in South Australia. There it is in suburban Brunswick. Some of the solar stuff that I've seen, CSIRO in Newcastle, where they've got a demonstration project with the tower and the, you know, solar receptors all being tilted to the right direction to concentrate the beam and store the energy. What we're investing in Chinchilla and Moree, some of the biggest solar projects in the world. I think as we get more investment into this kind of technology, the pace of change will really surprise us on the upside, to use the language of economists. So I think we can be very optimistic about that future.
Another question that relates to this has been submitted by Cassandra Berry, who I think is also in the audience tonight. Cassandra asks about... We found Cassandra?
Yes.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, Cassandra, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've been told is that you're not an economics student or an economics teacher. Your question is, under the agreement announced on Sunday, what sorts of research and development projects will actually receive assistance? This is under the other arena fund, I assume. And then I'm hoping that as part of answering this, you might reflect on that clean energy future in 2050. I mean, do you have a vision for what this country looks like in 2050?
That's a good question, and I think, frankly, I can foresee some things and not foresee others because the rate of change will be faster than we can imagine now. So just in the same way, when I first saw mobile phones and fax machines, I didn't imagine where we would be with the BlackBerry today. I'm not sure I can see all of this journey, but I can certainly see us harnessing the wonderful resources we've got around the country for energy generation. So whether it's solar, whether it's tidal, whether it's geothermal, whether it's wind, whether it's some of the amazing stuff that's happening using methane and gases that come off rubbish in landfill to create electricity, whether it's building design changes, people, racing for cleaner and cleaner building design, whether it's hospitals and other big public institutions changing from the way they generate energy now to cleaner ways of generating that energy. I think we will see changes right throughout society, how we live, how we travel, where we work, the industrial processes that make things in this country, the energy generation processes. I think they will all be different. And ARENA will help, play a role catalysing some of the research that drives that. I also think many of our businesses will look to our clean investment and innovation fund that was part of the package. We did want to be there working with industries like manufacturing industry to help them change their work processes, and I think we'll see that drive a lot of remarkable change too. I mean, I get to go to a lot of businesses and some good things are happening already. This is going to power it because it will have an ongoing price signal to drive change, as well as having a preparedness to partner in the innovation and the upscaling of so many of these projects.
You mentioned the businesses that you've gone and seen. I know you've seen demonstration projects, etc. Is there one moment that stands out for you where you had a realisation that in fact the power of renewable energy was well beyond what we had ever expected? Have there been demonstration projects you've seen that you've been particularly excited about? Well, look, I'd have to say this week the geothermal in Brunswick was, when I first moved from Adelaide to Melbourne as a student way back when, I moved to Brunswick. Very progressive part of Melbourne. Yeah, well, it wasn't so much then. No, really I moved to Brunswick and, coming from Adelaide, I remember thinking Melbourne was the coldest, wettest place on the planet. Which is from Adelaide. Wow. Yeah, which is unfair to Melbourne. I know. I've changed my view since. But to stand in, a place in Brunswick in July in Melbourne and to have heat blasting out of a pipe from geothermal. Now, Will's looking at me now like, oh, how could you not know that was happening? I didn't know that was happening. And, every vision I've ever seen or image I've seen of geothermal before has been hard hats, dusty landscapes, desert terrain. To see it in suburban Melbourne, it's just truly remarkable. That's a miracle to me. I mean, it's amazing. I think to many of us as well. John Cashman, and this was a question asked by many people online, wants to know why fuel was exempt from the carbon price and whether you're doing anything else to move Australia from polluting petrol over to other forms of fuel or other forms of transport options. Yeah, we needed to make some choices about the best design of carbon pricing for Australia, so we did decide to not have it apply to fuel, to the petrol that households buy and that tradespeople and people who are driving light vehicles buy. But there are some other important things happening in terms of our vehicle fleet. We are going to bring in fuel and vehicle standards in 2015, so that in itself will drive change in our motor vehicles and how clean they are.
We've also got rid of some distortions in the tax system. There's the fringe benefit tax arrangements for people who get motor vehicles, and they had this crazy distortion in it that you got a better tax position the further you drove the motor vehicle. And many people, I mean, I certainly do know of people who went on, long drives in June for no other purpose than ticking over.
Hopefully not in government vehicles.
Hopefully not in government, no, not in government vehicles, hopefully not in government vehicles, but for no other purpose than ticking over to a better tax rate before the 1st of July. I mean, this from every perspective, the environmental perspective, people's use of time, everything. It's sort of madness to have a system that encourages people to drive vast distances for no reason. And so we've got that out of the system now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Another question from Twitter. This is from @DeanHewson. And @Dean asks about the Productivity Commission and its role in reviewing industry assistance, whether you can talk us through that. And there's a hope for many of our audience and many people online that you might also reflect on the other independent bodies, such as the Independent Climate Authority, their role in making this an environmentally credible scheme.
Well, I'll start with the Climate Change Authority first. We've asked Bernie Fraser to lead this. He's a former Reserve Bank governor. He'd be well known to Australians from his advocacy of superannuation. And what this body is going to do is it's going to be central to advising government on the level of ambition for the cap and trade scheme, the emissions trading scheme, when we move to those fully flexible arrangements 3 years after the start. So they will be looking at what is happening around the world and advising government about the level of ambition we should have as we move towards the 80% target in 2050. Many people who have followed this debate very closely would be aware that there's a similar entity in the United Kingdom which provided Prime Minister Cameron with some advice about lifting ambition in the United Kingdom, which government then debated. Prime Minister Cameron's cabinet debated and decided to accept that advice about lifting ambition, and they have. So Bernie Fraser and that authority will play an important role there. The Productivity Commission, I think, has done some good work to date. We set them, and Will, sitting on the Multi-Party Climate Change Committee, would remember some of these discussions. We sent them to do a really hard job very quickly, which is to look at shadow carbon pricing in other economies. And they came back having identified 1,000 policies in other countries that are making a difference on carbon pollution. They certainly came back and said pricing carbon is the most efficient way of doing it. But now that they've got that sort of body of work, we'll be asking them to play an ongoing role, and particularly to be reviewing the jobs and competitiveness part of the scheme, because the more movement we see in other nations, the more that has got implications for whether or not our emissions-intensive, trade-exposed industries need the same degree of shielding that we've built into the current scheme. So they will play an important role for us.
Another question that I guess is related to that, and we've got to wrap up in a minute. But this is from Marina Ivanic, and she asks how the carbon price, how this renewable energy plan will improve the environment. But I'm hoping in reflecting on that, you might also reflect on the environmental credibility of this plan and how that compares with the CPRS. Why, in fact, this is a better plan, why it may be more environmentally credible than what we've seen in the past.
I think there are some big changes in this plan that do mean on the environmental side it's a better plan. We've lifted ambition to 80% in 2050. That's a big change. We've created the Climate Change Authority to provide independent and rigorous advice continuously about lifting ambition as we get on that journey to the 80% target in 2050. This has got a huge renewables package, very, very different from the carbon pollution reduction scheme, between the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and what we're calling ARENA, the body that will catalyse innovation. It's $13 billion.
It's a huge amount of money.
It's a big amount of money, so that's a big change. This comes with a very substantial land package, $1.7 billion, so that can work land management and storing carbon, but there is, the best part of $1 billion too in a biodiversity fund, which will enable us as a country to better manage our great landscape and to create wildlife corridors and the like, which help store carbon and do the right thing. They are big changes. I'm also particularly proud of the fact that the household assistance comes as a tax reform, which has got merit in people's pockets, and that's important, but it's also valuing work. It's going to take 1 million taxpayers out of the tax to work. They won't have to fill in tax returns, and it's got a particular benefit for working women, the secondary income earners in families who make a decision about how and when they'll return to work after having had children. It will make that return to work more profitable for them. They will see the direct benefit of returning to work straight up without tax. So a statistic I'm very proud of about, if you look at all of the taxpayers in our country, about 60% of them are men, 40% are the statistics are the other way around. 60% are women, 40% are men. I think that's a very good result.
You can reflect on, just finally, out of all the things you've talked about tonight, and you have gone through probably the vast majority of the details of the package in some way, when this legislation passes, what do you think you'll be most proud of achieving?
This is going to sound like an answer on a tangent, but a few Friday nights ago I went to Raylene Boyle's 60th birthday party in Melbourne, which she'd chosen to share with hundreds of people as a fundraiser for the Breast Cancer Network. And of the many things in her life she reflected on that great call with Bruce McAvaney when she called the Cathy Freeman race, where he concluded the race by saying something like, "What a champion, what a legend," and she said, "What a relief." I think
there's a fair emotion to
I think I'm going to be recalling a bit of that when we get there with the legislation. What a relief that this big job is now done. What a relief. But what an amazing for our country to have realised, particularly in an era where people talk us down every day as if we're somehow not capable of reform anymore. I think we're a smart people, we're capable of reform, and we'll get this done.
So as a reformist Prime Minister...